Could the liberation of Melita Paul signal a new counterattack by the Ukrainian army? The possibilities of this hypothetical new counteroffensive are being discussed by media outlets around the world amid increasing frequency of attacks by Ukrainian forces on bases and clusters of Russian troops around Melita Paul. For Russia, it became a key part of the so-called land bridge across the Sea of Azov to occupied Crimea. The city is located at the intersection of two major highways and an important railway line connecting Russia to the peninsula and other occupied areas in southern Ukraine. If the Ukrainian armed forces manage to liberate Melita Paul and regain control of the city's most important transport hubs, this will greatly complicate the possibility of resupply and reinforcement of Russian troops. But retaking Melita Paul is no easy task for the Ukrainian forces. As Fridtjof Nansen said, "We do the difficult right away." The impossible takes time for the Ukrainian hearts who continue to fight with this motto. Taking Melita Paul is a goal that can be achieved even if it's not easy. Do you think the Ukrainian troops can realize the Melita Paul goal? Let's look for the answer to this question. In the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces on Melita Paul using missiles and saboteurs, Ukraine is focusing on the city of Melita Paul, with which Russia has a vital link to Crimea before an expected southern attack. Ukraine is stepping up efforts to isolate and push back Russian forces in and around the strategically vital city of Melita Paul ahead of a Ukrainian offensive to drive Russian forces out of the south, which is widely expected to be the next major phase of the war. Kiev uses long-range precision missile strikes, sabotage missions, and targeted assassinations to focus on the city, which is located about 64 kilometers behind the front lines in the Zaporizhia region. In the last day, the Ukrainian army signed two large explosions in the north of the city of Melita Paul. It was reported that the explosions took place around 6:30 p.m. The crimson glow of the flames that pierced the dusk illuminated the sky. In addition to military bases belonging to Russian troops were destroyed as a result of the explosions. With the explosion of the ammunition at the military base, the region turned into hell. Russian troops in Melita Paul came under crossfire from Ukrainian troops in northeast Zaporizhia and Kherson. Russian troops are completely in the middle of hell. At least 7 Russian field commanders and hundreds of soldiers stationed at military bases were reportedly destroyed after massive explosions at Russian headquarters in Melita Paul 4 days before the explosions at the military base. An explosion occurred at an airport in Melita Paul. It was learned that the explosion took place around 1 o'clock. Official authorities did not make a statement about the attack that took place at the airport. The smokescreen over the information about the incident still remains. On the other hand, it remains unclear with which weapons the Ukrainian forces carried out the explosion. The city is at the far end of the range of Ukraine's HIMARS rockets, but Melita Paul is within range of newer weapons set to be deployed, including the air-launched JDAM bombs promised by the US and the ground-launched GLSDB munitions. The Ukrainian armed forces are signaling a counterattack on the southern front line with their successful offensive operations. At the same time, the definition of Melita Paul as a gateway to Crimea adds another perspective to these attacks. If Ukraine can liberate Melita Paul, Crimea will no longer be a distant target. In addition to the attacks on Melita Paul, the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian forces in the Black Sea Peninsula also make the agenda quite active. Now let's turn our route to Crimea and take a look at the loud explosions that took place here. Kiev promised that it would not stop fighting Russia until all forces, including those on the peninsula, were withdrawn. Attacks targeting weapons depots and military outposts have increased in recent months with the acceleration of the attacks. Ukrainian soldiers are approaching the Russian fortresses in the south of Ukraine. Step by step, unmanned aerial vehicles belonging to Kiev hit the Russian trains carrying Kalibr cruise missiles in the city of Koi in the north of the Crimean Peninsula. Explosions occurred on the railway as a result of the UAV attack. As a result of the explosions, the Kalibr cruise missiles were destroyed. As is known, Koi is a transfer station even at the beginning of a full-scale invasion. The defeat of logistics will be the main way to influence the ideas of Russian troops about what to do in the Crimea. On the other hand, time flows like water in the Ukraine war. In this war that's been going on for more than a year, Kiev has focused its targets on certain points. But time is not on Ukraine's side. Still, key factors on the battlefield allow for an optimistic forecast. When Ukraine wins, the war will be over. This is the formula that the Western governments have sworn to support in the fight for the Ukrainian army against the Russian invaders. As the second year of the war begins, however, Kiev's victory on the battlefield must come as quickly as possible because the West's patience is limited. The Friends of Ukraine thus spread the hope that a decisive military victory can be won this autumn. This puts pressure on the Ukrainian military to take action. Successful counterattacks at the end of last summer aroused high expectations in the West. This winter, the Russians were able to consolidate the front line, expand their defensive positions, and train mobilized soldiers instead of advancing fast on the principle of running water. The Russian forces advanced like lava, slowly, stubbornly, and with devastating destruction. Russia's approach is based on playing against time, directly on the Achilles heel of Ukrainian resistance, namely financial, military, and rhetorical support from the West. That is why the Ukrainian army should seize the initiative as quickly as possible. Unlike counterattacks east of Kharkiv, this can no longer be achieved only with momentum and bold tactics. Rather, it requires a precise, surprising, and sustainable approach. Nor can the General Staff in Kiev count on the timely readiness of the battle tanks promised in their plans. The important thing is to focus on the weaknesses of the Russian troops and decisively attack vulnerable points. The Ukrainian army will be able to regain the terrain only if the lava flow can be stopped and the Russian formations disorganized. At the same time, accurate artillery fire deep into enemy territory can disrupt Russian supply chains. This is how the Ukrainian army cut off the supplies to the invaders on the western bank of the Dnieper River. The announced delivery of small-scale and launch bombs for the HIMARS missile artillery systems from the U.S. company Boeing has increased the range of the Ukrainian army to 150 kilometers. This will allow it to hit the Crimean roads, railway lines, key military airfields, and ammunition depots in occupied eastern Ukraine. The same is true for Russian command points withdrawn from the area accessible to HIMARS systems during the consolidation phase. The U.S. government has promised to deliver the first tranche of GLSDB weapons by spring, and Ukrainian planning may be coordinated with the arrival of these munitions. A key element of the long-range approach will be the deployment of special operations forces in occupied areas, possibly in close coordination with local resistance forces. For example, partisan activities have been reported from the Melita Paul region. The Ukrainian General Staff will likely include them in their assessment. But the West must stick to a realistic definition of what a Ukrainian military victory means. A sickle cutting through Melita Paul to the Sea of Azov and cutting through an important pocket of land may be enough to capture large numbers of Russian soldiers. As a result, Melita Paul continues to play an active role in the southern front line. A success achieved here can reach Kiev as far as the Crimea. As time progresses, we will wait and see how new developments will affect the course of the war. The most critical region in the Russia-Ukraine war is without a doubt Crimea. While the Russian army is struggling not to lose Crimea, which it occupied in 2014, the Ukrainian army is fighting to reclaim its territory from the occupiers. When Russian leader Vladimir Putin failed to succeed in his plan to invade Ukraine, which he launched last year, he found himself in a position to lose Crimea because the successful attacks of the Ukrainian army have reached as far as Crimea. Putin wants to dominate the seas by maintaining his presence in Crimea, so much so that the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian occupiers is located on the Crimean Peninsula. In addition, the ports in this region play an important role in international trade. But Putin is getting closer to losing his presence in Crimea because the Ukrainian army's attacks on Crimea are increasing day by day. Since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian leader Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Crimea will be liberated from the occupiers. The developments in Crimea demonstrate Zelensky's determination and the success of the Ukrainian army. The pulse of the Russian-Ukrainian war continues to beat in Crimea. The Ukrainian Air Force is constantly monitoring the targets of the occupiers in Crimea. The areas detected by reconnaissance drones are hit by unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles. The air base of the occupiers in Crimea was shaken by the attack of Ukrainian drones the other day. Moreover, the air base housed a Su-24 attack aircraft, which are of great importance for the Russian army. Before we reveal the details about the attack on the air base of the Russian occupiers in Crimea, we have a request for you as an ALA News team. We continue to report all the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war with our understanding of accurate and impartial reporting. You can click on the Super Thanks button to support our teammates who work hard in the preparation of these reports and contribute to the continuation of the reports without interruption. The base of the Russian invaders was hit by Ukrainian drones. The attack was carried out in the morning. The Ukrainian Air Force detected the invaders' airbase with reconnaissance drones flown before the attack. The coordinates of the area were recorded. The next step was to carry out the attack. Ukrainian drones were flown to strike the airbase in Crimea. Upon reaching the area, the drones successfully hit the targeted points. The images shared after the attack showed the intensity of the explosions. In the images shared on social media after the airbase of the Russian invaders was hit, huge clouds of smoke were seen in the city of Gorodetskoy in the Simferopol rayon. Residents of the area, located kilometers away from the airbase, said that the windows of their houses were shaking. The sound of the explosions was heard in many parts of Crimea. One of the most important reasons for the intensity of the explosions at the airbase was the Su-24 attack aircrafts that the Russian occupiers had stationed at the airbase. Builds during the Soviet Union to offer an attack aircraft plays a major role in the Russian Air Force's airstrikes against Ukraine. The Russian army, which was about to lose its ammunition stock as a result of the Ukrainian army's attacks, suffered another major loss with the latest attack. No information on the number of aircraft at the airbase in Crimea has been shared, but the intensity of the explosions indicates that the number of aircraft is high. Ukrainian authorities have not yet made a statement about the attack on the Russian airbase. The statement made by Russia concealed the facts. Russian authorities have been making false statements to hide the losses they have suffered since the war began because they don't want to accept their losses against Ukraine. This was also the case with the attack on the military base. Sergei Aksyonov, the Russian occupation official in charge of Crimea, made statements about the attack on the airbase in Gvardiskoy that concealed the facts. Aksyonov said that a Ukrainian drone was shot down in the airbase area. According to Aksyonov, the drone crashed in a field and there was no damage or loss of life. However, statements by locals close to the area and footage shared on social media revealed that Aksyonov's statements were not true. While the Ukrainian army was targeting the occupiers in Crimea, there was a new development in Russia. A natural gas pipeline in the city of Pelham in Russia's Sverdlovsk Oblast exploded. A big fire broke out after the explosion. One of Russia's most important natural gas companies made a statement about the explosion. According to the statement, the explosion and the natural gas pipeline occurred at 6:37 p.m. Many posts containing images of the explosion were shared on social media. The severity of the fire is clearly visible in the images. The fact that the fire broke out in a natural gas pipeline increases this intensity even more. In the video, shared flames rising tens of meters upwards draw attention. No statement has been made about the explosion in the city of Pelham. But as always, these explosions brought to mind Ukrainian partisan groups because partisan groups have organized many attacks on Russian territory by crossing the occupied territories. The aim of these attacks was not to harm the civilian population like the Russian occupiers. The partisans attacked military bases, airports, gathering and administrative centers belonging to the occupying Russian army, and many points that would cause economic damage to Russia. The Russian army has been powerless against the Ukrainian army, which has been strengthened with the support of Western and European countries. One of the biggest reasons for the loss of power of the Russian army is the problems within the army and the Russian soldiers who do not want to fight. The Russian army includes many different groups within its structure. The most well-known of these are the Wagner Group soldiers and the soldiers loyal to Chechen leader Kadyrov. The conflict between Russian army soldiers, Wagner Group soldiers, and Chechen soldiers loyal to Kadyrov is constantly increasing. The Wagner Group started to disagree with the Russian army, especially after its operations in Bakhmut. Because the Wagner Group had held victory celebrations in this region without the knowledge of the Russian army, and the clashes in the region were also continuing. Making victory declarations independently of the official army was the end of Prigozhin, so much so that the leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is having serious problems with the Russian chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, and the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Wagner Group soldiers do not listen to the orders of Russian army commanders, while Kadyrov's Chechen soldiers are constantly humiliated for their race and beliefs. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, unable to solve the problems in the army, is also facing a troop problem. The number of soldiers in the Russian army is decreasing day by day. Every day, around 1,000 Russian soldiers die as a result of the attacks by the Ukrainian army. That being said, about 10,000 Russian soldiers have surrendered to the Ukrainian army since the beginning of the war. Russian youths do not want to die for Putin's own political career. The Russian people continue their protests for an end to the war. It seems to be very difficult for Putin, who is cornered every day in the face of all these problems, to continue the war for a long time. The war between Ukraine and Russia is about to escalate. There have been many developments on the front line this week, but the most notable event was the crash of a US UAV over the Black Sea by colliding with a Russian jet. The Pentagon welcomed this event professionally and did not allow tensions to escalate between NATO and Russia. However, the wreckage of the US UAV is important, and in this case, Turkey, a NATO country, may allow US ships to pass through the straits. So how did the event take place, and what kind of path did the USA, Turkey, and Russia follow in the Black Sea after this event? This week, a Russian Su-27 came face to face with the MQ9 Reaper unmanned aerial vehicle carrying out a reconnaissance mission. Allegedly, the pilot of the Su-27 deliberately dumped fuel on the UAV, and the UAV was buried in the Black Sea waters with an engine failure. This incident ignited a minor tension between the USA and Russia, whose relations were already at a level of rupture. The US State Department summoned the Russian ambassador for an urgent meeting on the matter, and the US Navy in the Mediterranean went to the alert level. Russia, on the other hand, claimed they were not wrong in the incident and that the US drone violated Russian airspace. However, the US and NATO UAVs have been flying over the Black Sea for months, and the US MQ9 Reaper was flying 120 kilometers off the Crimea. This region is the international sea and airspace of the Black Sea. The United States contacted Turkey in order to send some of its ships deployed in the Mediterranean to the Ukrainian shores and ensure the safety of its elements there within the scope of emergency measures. Turkey's defense minister plans to allow US ships to pass through the Bosphorus after the incident with the MQ9 Reaper drone. The crash of the US tactical attack drone in the Black Sea waters was a situation that allowed Turkey to bring US warships into the Black Sea waters through the Bosphorus. Information on the subject was announced by Hulusi Akar, Minister of National Defense of Turkey. Within the scope of communication between Russian Federation aircraft and US forces, information about the crash of the drone immediately reached Turkey. Turkey is following the events closely and continues to hold various contacts. Turkey, which tries to solve this problem in a reasonable and logical way, both within the country and through negotiations with its interlocutors. The Americans is in favor of a peaceful solution. The Turkish president, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of National Defense are working closely with the US warships to enter the Bosphorus. The decision will be announced as soon as possible. The appearance of US warships in Black Sea waters could clearly lead to a serious escalation, as it will most likely try to prevent Russia from hitting Ukraine's critical infrastructure. So can US ships easily enter the Black Sea? In order to answer this question, we need to examine the Montrose Straits contract in detail. Montrose, the international agreement signed in 1936 that gives Turkey control over the Istanbul and Dardanelles Straits and the right to regulate the passage of warships, gives Turkey full control over the straits and guarantees the free passage of civilian ships in peacetime. The convention limits the passage of warships belonging to countries that do not have a coast on the Black Sea. The terms of the contract have been the subject of debate over the years, especially as it grants the Soviet Union's navy access to the Mediterranean. It replaced the Straits Convention, signed with the Lausanne Treaty in 1923. With this agreement, the task of the International Straits Commission was terminated. Turkey has always been concerned about the restrictions imposed by the Straits Convention, which was signed with the Treaty of Lausanne. With the resumption of the arms race, Turkey's uneasiness increased gradually, relying on disarmament hopes that were up to date at the time the convention was signed. When Turkey announced its unrest and its proposal to change the status of the straits to the signatory states, it had seen a common understanding from almost all of these states, which started to take place in different polls. In a note of the UK Foreign Office, dated July 23, 1936, it was stated that Turkey's request for the amendment of the Straits Convention is considered justified. The following article about the passage of Montrose warships through the Straits is important in time of war. If Turkey is not at war, the warships will enjoy complete freedom of passage and round trip in the Straits under the specified conditions. In this article, the U.S. Navy can reach the Black Sea if the Turkish government approves, but a critical article of the contract can prevent U.S. ships from entering the Black Sea. The relevant article states, warships of any warring state shall be prohibited from passing through the Straits except in case of assistance to an attack state and under a mutual aid treaty binding Turkey. The downing of the drone would be an outright declaration of war for the United States. As it turns out to be a deliberate action by Russia in such a case, the Monroe Convention prohibits both U.S. and Russian ships from entering and leaving the Black Sea. At the moment, the crisis between the two countries seems to be about to be resolved through diplomatic means, but it is difficult to predict what the situation will be in the future. The entry of U.S. ships into the Black Sea will be perceived as a threat by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the risk of the war spreading out of Ukraine as a result is too great. So what path will Russia follow? A senior Russian official said Moscow will try to salvage the wreckage of the drone. It was reported that the drone was most likely broken during the accident, and the remaining debris likely sank to a depth of thousands of feet in the Black Sea. An official said the Russians had arrived at the crash site and would likely manage to collect some pieces of debris, such as metal pieces, and that the United States had taken mitigation measures to prevent the loss of any sensitive intelligence. US officials have spoken quite confidently that what is valuable has no residual value. Video released by the Pentagon, captured by a camera aboard the MQ9, shows a fighter jet passing close at first and then making another pass and crashing into the drone's propeller. The footage briefly disappears after the collision, but returns to show that the propeller had been damaged by the impact. The Air Force said. The Air Force said in a statement accompanying the video that the Russian jet dumped fuel on the MQ9 and crashed into its propeller, forcing U.S. forces to drop the MQ9 in international waters. In the statement, it was stated that the video released by the European Command of the U.S. military was edited for a long time, but the events were depicted in order. The U.S. European Command has asked the Russians to examine the intelligence benefits of drone flights against the escalation risks to the restricted area declared over the Black Sea. The U.S. has already made a flight over the hit area to monitor Russia's rescue efforts and plans to fly more, but is re-evaluating drone operations. It remains to be seen what path the two countries will follow. If the U.S. wants to bring its ships into the Black Sea, this naturally means that Turkey should be involved. But Turkey, despite all the news and speculation, has made its side clear on the anniversary of the fake referendum held in Crimea. Turkey reiterated its commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity and that it will not recognize Russia's annexation attempt. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which is part of Ukraine, was annexed by the Russian Federation 9 years ago in an illegal referendum and in violation of international law. In a statement made by the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the occasion of the anniversary of the annexation, it reiterated its assurances that the situation was not recognized and stated that it continues to support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In the statement, it was stated that the situation of the Crimean Tatars, who are the indigenous people of Crimea, is always a priority for Turkey. Turkey also reiterated that it will continue to support the Crimean Tatars, whom it sees as a brotherly people, to preserve their identity and live in safety and peace in their homeland of Crimea. Turkey is a very important actor, both as a location and as a NATO member, especially shortly before the start of the Ukrainian offensives against Crimea. Turkey's support statement was not well received by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the fact that U.S. ships will pass through the Turkish Straits seems to affect the relations between the two countries. Although Turkey has supported Ukraine's war efforts since the beginning of the war, it still maintains its commercial relations with Russia. And if we assume that the Turkish economy has been in decline in recent years and that Russia has been struggling with economic sanctions, the deterioration of commercial relations will not benefit either country. It is difficult to predict what the situation will be in the coming days, but Turkey's role in the war between Ukraine and Russia does not seem to end in the short term.